What's up? It's Rowan here from Artist Smart Education with another episode of the HSC Economics Weekly Stats Update. In this episode, we're unpacking the recent RBA monetary policy decision. We're looking at a brief bit of analysis around monetary policy, and then we're going to be looking at some data and analysis you can use around the effectiveness of a number of the fiscal policy childcare subsidies and how inflation is really impacting the ability of those to drive participation in the labour market. So a great analysis you can use for recent fiscal policy as well as labour market outcomes. Now, if you're dialing in for the first time, in these episodes I summarise all the main headlines from around the domestic and global economy over the last week, giving you the key stats and analysis you need to level up your short answers and your essays in HSC Economics to unlock BAT Band 6. So let's dive in really quickly and look at the recent RBA monetary policy decision. Now, ultimately, they've decided to keep the cash rate the same at 4.35%. Now, what they acknowledge is inflation is staying way more persistent than they expected. Okay, so the underlying rate of inflation, which is the best medium to long-term measure of inflation in the economy, is 3.9. Now, that was 4.1 in December, so it has come down, but it's come down very, 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 very slowly, and that's ultimately what they're acknowledging. Now, alongside that, they're acknowledging that the economic outlook is uncertain. It's uncertain, simply because economic activity is very weak. We've got slow growth in GDP. In fact, we've got, a per capita GDP recession, okay? And so as a result, the only reason we're growing as an economy, very anemically, is because of, population growth at the end of the day. They're also identifying, okay, that there are uncertainties around the lag effects in monetary policy, okay? They're still not really sure. They've made a lot of changes. There's, a 12 to 18 month lag, and so they don't want to make too many changes yet without seeing some of that lag play out. They're also acknowledging that the global economy outlook does not look great, okay? They're acknowledging that the Chinese economy is softening, okay? Other central banks have eased policy in terms of monetary policy settings, okay? And also, though, we've seen, for example, unemployment uptick in the US. So all of this going along highlights just a lot of uncertainty, which generally goes for slower, more cautious policy decisions. Now, ultimately, what they have acknowledged, though, is that the inflation target is still the priority. So even though in the recent review, full employment was brought up to, sort of be at the same level of price stability as the objective, which they acknowledge, they're really highlighting here that at the end of the day, the inflation target is, what they need to be getting under control. Okay, and so what they're highlighting is really that for now rates are staying as they are, but they could go up, they could come down. There's a high level of uncertainty around this. Now, what it does highlight, and look, you can get more data, like that was the sort of media release. You can get the statement of monetary policy. It's a 64-page document which does a deep dive with loads of stats. Fully recommend it post-trials if you need some stats around monetary policy. But you can also get the in-brief summary of the statement. Now, what's really interesting to see, though, is just the RBA's acknowledgement that inflation is going to stay much higher and for longer than anticipated. So you can see the 2 to 3 target. We can see we're here, CPI outcome and trimmed mean outcome. Okay, we can see, and they're well above, right, the 2 to 3% target right now. You can see really by the end of the year, maybe CPI inflation is right on the high end if we're lucky, okay? Trim mean is still higher at 3.5, okay? And okay, great, we're finally getting to a point, middle of next year, 2025, where maybe they're both almost at the high end. But if we look at that big picture, we can see overall, particularly with CPI inflation forecast, right, that, it's spending more time outside of, the target range than in, and really the trimmed mean, which remember is the best, medium to long term, the first time that's going to actually get into target is December 2025. Now that's 18 months away. So it really highlights, I think, just the challenge that the RBA is having with how persistent inflation is. But I think it also indicates really the limitations of monetary policy in getting inflation under control. Now, as a very brief note, if you do want more data, this is the statement, okay? As you can see, if we scroll up here, there's a PDF available. It has lots of data. You can go through and look at global economic, domestic, labour market and wages, inflation, right? Assessment of spare capacity. It'll give you their outlook for the future as well. Some really great data that you can pull from this if you're needing it post-trials for your HSC. Now, Ross Gittins has a great bit of analysis, okay, around monetary policy and some of its limitations. Now, one of the things that he highlights, which is something we've spoken about in recent episodes as well, is that really at the end of the day, okay, our reliance on interest rates is hugely unfair. Because really the excessive demand for goods and services, right, that in part, it's not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons why we've got inflation. There's also a lot of supply side issues, which note, monetary policy being macro aggregate demand will not touch. So therefore it's, uniquely unsuited to dealing with some of this inflationary pressure. But his acknowledgement is, even if we were to assume for a moment that all of it was, aggregate demand, excessive demand based, right? All of us have contributed to this excessive demand. Yourself, myself, your families, but ultimately only a minority, those with big mortgages, are directly being pressed to pull back the spending. And so we're trying to pull back a small group of the economy's spending in the hope that we can pull it back so aggressively that it's enough to pull the whole economy back while everyone else still continues to maybe spend as they were, okay? And so he's arguing really what this indicates is that this shows the real structural limitation, I think we could argue here, of monetary policy in trying to deal with inflation in the economy, and that's why we need reform, okay? His suggestion is, we need something that's going to be actually more broad-based. Ironically, something that's going to cover the entirety of the economy, not just a group of mortgage holders. And so his suggestion here is maybe a temporary change in the rate of the GST, which everyone has to pay on goods and services bought, maybe temporary changes to the rate of compulsory superannuation. Again, everyone who's in a job is getting paid compulsory superannuation, okay? His point here is that, what that's going to do is it's going to not just bear the brunt on a small group of the economy, and as a result would probably bring inflation under control much more quickly in maybe a way that would be less painful. Now, how can you use this in your essays ultimately? This can go at the end of a paragraph or in your conclusion. This should be like a brief acknowledgement around the core limitation that's in existence here, but also then a suggestion for what could be. And that's going to really be something that you can just put in there to elevate that essay into a very high band 6, assuming that you've got the other fundamentals right? Because it's showing the marker, that you're inherently aware of the limitation, and you're so aware of the limitation that you've identified, right, that there's alternatives that could be used here instead, right? And that goes into the quality of your analysis. Now, the final thing is really some analysis around Australia's childcare system. It's a hugely important part of how we manage our participation rates, really to encourage parents to come back and to work because they've got childcare in place. Now, ultimately, in the budget, the 2023-24 budget, so not this recent budget, but last year's budget, okay, that budget included a number of policies around really trying to support and increase the subsidies to childcare. And the reason it did so was to drive participation, right? Particularly, in the Australian economy, mothers' participation, but both parents ultimately, it was focused on, right? And so ultimately, what it was trying to do was for families earning under, $530,000 a year, right? It was trying to broaden it so more families therefore would qualify for the subsidies, and they increased the subsidy from 85 to 90% for those earning under $80,000 a year. Okay, now unfortunately, because of inflation, all of those benefits have wholly, as this analysis has been eroded by increases in daycare fees. Ultimately, okay, because of the cost of inflation impacting food, electricity, rent for daycare, wages, daycare prices have just gone through the roof. Okay, and as a result, all of that benefit the government's passed on has been eroded. And this is, I think, a really great bit of analysis you can bring in around, right? If you're looking at, fiscal policy around labour market outcomes, right? This can show how the impact of inflation, right, can really erode the effectiveness of government spending, in this case to drive improved labour force participation for parents. So there we have it. Key headlines from around the economy. For those of you in trials right now, all the best. Hope you nail it, and see you next week.